everyone, and welcome back to the channel and to this, a nice little catch up, not a catch up, but a recap of where everything is at the current point of the writing of the lore, because obviously where I'm at with the writing of the lore is still miles behind the timeline up to where the books are set. But for those who saw the last stream I did a while back now on this, I went through a phase of multiple videos that all interconnected and actually brought the events primarily of Arisen up to the Aphalas Shadow piece, which is where it's currently paused. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the different areas, the different factors, explain who's left, what's going on, and we will start from there. But to change it up a little bit, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to start with Talonser. I'm going to start with the Trolls. The reason I'm choosing to start with the Trolls is that between the Idros Years of Sorrow and the Crisis of Galacaross, there was about a decade of just utter pain for the Trolls. They had a brief civil war, they had the death of technically two kings, although one kind of, well, it was all manipulated by Tonnreaf to begin with. But I won't go too far into detail over what happened, but it has left them in the charge of Lezerir. He is the only connection point of the royal line still sort of there, or any form of nobility, because there was another figure who could have taken over, Orohorn, but he during Galacaross, the warden city of Kalonarith gets absolutely devastated, and Oron, having been almost like self-exiled from Idros, he formed his own clan and they got trapped in there, and by the time other forces were able to arrive, he had basically starved. So yeah, the Trolls at the moment are in a massive need and time for recovery because they got battered about to a extreme extent, and at some point, I haven't quite decided when this is, but between where I'm at in the lore now and when the books come along, Talonser does split. It splits back into the various clans that it originally started as. So whether that's on the cusp of what's going on now or whether that comes a bit further down the line, I don't quite know. But whilst we are talking about the Trolls as well, I do also want to briefly state that there is still elements of this which I'm wanting to explore and go into detail with. The Arnavan colony, one of the few attempts the Trolls ever made of spreading from Idros, or the Twin Isles, but the colony loses contact and it's unknown whatever happened to them. It might be a simple case that they just vanished or faded, like some early settlements in the New World did, or might be a bit more intriguing, but it is worth noting that whilst the colony of Arnavan did disappear, these three settlements, they supposedly still have presence of Trolls, but whether they are separate, whether they've been merged into the kingdom of Onokrith, what their current status their current status their current status is unknown, and there has not been too much exploration in the lore as to them yet. And partly that's because I've been focusing on other areas, but also partly is because I do want to maintain some mystery with that, as I do with a lot of things with Honor Idros. Right, well, moving on from Idros, there's really not too much to report onto the Twin Isles aside from the fact that a part of the Shadow piece involves the Dracons and the Wood Elves starting to properly construct a haven city within, which is what will be the land, well, on the land in Elizabeth, the actual settlement of the same name. And it's also worth noting that the Gardens of Arith are no longer present. They have been completely burnt. So I will need to change the map at some point and alter that. But that's to note for the Trolls at the Twin Isles. Now, on to Galacaross. Going to clarify what happens in Galacaross, because it's very simple. Galacaross turned out to be basically the base of operations for Senetvia. Her legions were gathering. She had the Hounds of Kalaj, who were again, it'll be tagged in. They are the descendants of one of the original Tonnreaf creatures, the corrupted ones. The undead that sort of festered and corrupted the jungle of Obsidian. And bestial sprites, her own Mieda, represented by the fire pits, and everything that she was building. And for ages, the spirits of the father and Amendiel were holding her back at bay, but eventually she did break free, she did break out, and her forces did eventually overwhelm the goblins of northern Haraketh. And Galacaross did see the destruction of them. So I might, in the edit, I might put up a little tally and a marker to note what's happened so far. So currently where we are in the lore, the Trolls are crippled in a form of recovery. There has been a brief offshoot faction that has been destroyed, as in Clan Orohon, and now you've got the Goblins of Northern Haraketh that have also been destroyed, which is another loss for the Goblin peoples. And pretty much outside of Onokrith, few other of the hybrid factions and the Steppes, that was pretty much the only independent faction of goblins left. So, or should I say that? No, the only properly loyal ones to the Protector races and that, as in afterwards they get rewarded as a recognised member of the Protector races because of their sacrifice, because the last of them sacrificed themselves to annihilate Galacaross, basically, knowing that it just could never be recovered. And I mean, at this point, Galacaross has seen with it being destroyed, it had seen the destruction of the goblins, the destruction of the stone elves, aside from those who escaped with the Last Prince, and many other things like the crippling of the bestial sprites. It had a lot, and being a hotbed for necromancy, probably one of the worst in all the world. So yeah, but and I'm sorry this ordering is going a bit weird, but still keeping on the topic of Galacaross, as that was the most recent area, we shall move on to the events of Schaa, and I am just going to. So now on to the other faction, or one of the others, because there's another to be mentioned that got so heavily battered by the Years of Sorrow and Galacaross. And this is the irony, like, in Tonnreaf's War and the Idros Years of Sorrow, the ogres were specifically tasked in alignment with what Tonnreaf was planning under the instruction of Nagrasak, and they were specified and informed to invade the Twin Isles, keep the Trolls occupied, because it was coordinated assaults all over. The Dark Elves and Nagrasak Demesne fought off the Dwarfs and the Ajati. The Ogres sailed across and attacked the Trolls, leaving a coordinated effort from the Dark Elves and Tonnreaf's domain to try and take out Destinal. it didn't work, but it was a clear attempt. But the current situation for Sarakarth is that it's under repair. Whoops, didn't mean to do that. Carbohearth and Amatroth have both been severely crippled through invasions and just that usual stuff, because there was a point in Galacaross where the ogres were completely driven to Hedonith and Hedo Lake. Their mountain valley sort of holdings, that's the only places that they were driven to because their lower settlement had just been overwhelmed. And because obviously fighting a prolonged war of attrition, they were going to struggle anyway. And they have taken probably one of the worst beatings as well, because not only did all of this happen, which has now even caused the Dracons to come and help them repair, as a sort of showing of goodwill, the ogre family, as in the royal family bloodline, the first one, who was within the Tonnreaf's War in Years of Sorrow, was killed by fighting the trolls, and then you have his 3 sons. And Saronth is killed in Amatroth, dueling a corrupted ogre who basically had managed to acquire knowledge of the obsidian magic and to push it beyond its limits and become honestly one of the most dangerous necromancers. Senevia gave him corruptive magic as well, so he was able to twist the two to overpower the inert barriers. So he ends up dying in a duel in Amatroth, but then you have his 3 sons. Xenac is killed during the Crisis of Galacaross in honestly something that would go down in the history books as a nobly stupid effort. He tries to take one of the weapons, the Scarlet Axe, I believe. He travels to Galacaross with a selection of hand-picked ogres. He also goes... No, they are aided by Steotha in this, but it's also a rare case of alliances because Tivos, the leader of the Ajati, and a few of his folk also go, as does the king of the dwarfs, Jelkorn. And they go there to try and assassinate Senevia, and Xenac disappears into Barrelath. You hear a massive howl, and that's pretty much the last you hear of him. So, to summarise, it's very notable or noteworthy to say that Senevia most likely ate him. Or something of that degree. And then Raukan is honestly one who, with the factor of the shadow piece, he's probably going to be one who's caused more issues than he realises. During the crisis, as a way to try and dismantle forces, Raukan... First of all, Raukan is a double agent and an informant for Senevia. He's just sheer jealousy of Xenac and feeling like he was not treated admirably. And he is tasked with assassinating his one living brother, Dragarm, to completely cripple the throne of Sarakarth. And it happens at a camp in the night in Adela, ironically. So, round about here. And the attempt goes wrong, and he doesn't end up killing Dragarm. He ends up being killed himself, but before he gets killed, he ends up killing the prince of the Dark Elves, Steotha. So he, in fudging the target up, instead of killing his own brother, who is now the sole remainder of their family and the current leader of the remnants of the ogres as they recover, he ended up killing Zakarth's unnamed son, who was also his heir. And then later on, during Galacaross, now moving on to the Dark Elves, as the ogres are kind of covered in that, Zakarth gets killed in the third Siege of Rake, and whilst the other territories for Steotha were ironically relatively unharmed because they kind of get missed and it's sort of the whole wave kind of passes through the desert instead to try and take a straight shot at the Spire Calastenir, Rake gets hit by about 3 different sieges, and in the third one Zakarth is killed. So currently what you're looking at, because of the actions of Galacaross, the Sarakarth royal family has been crippled, and the Steotha royal family is down to Zakarth's daughter Selquin and her husband, who I have not listed yet, if she does indeed get around to that. And the other... sorry. So, ironically, the thing about Galacaross that's the crisis of Galacaross, which is insignificant for Schaa, is the fact that Nagrasak's allies are the ones who got crippled the worst by it. Steotha very nearly had its royal family wiped out. Sarakarth very nearly had its royal family wiped out and has had 2 of its major settlements utterly just crippled, as well as the Dark Elf capital, and even Nagrasak's own Demesne came under threat. And this is one of the strange parts, but what bought the other forces of Aphalas time to try and fend against Senetvia? Tonnreaf. In this effort, and I need to just cover a video over Tonnreaf because he has actions that obviously impact Destinal a lot. He is significant in what happens into the Years of Sorrow. I am so sorry if you can hear that dog barking. And then he's popped up back in the Demesne, and he leads forth all of Nagrasak's reserve demon legions from the fire pits and engages in the incredibly lengthy Battle of Dead and Demon against the forces of Senetvia, primarily the forces of the undead ogres, trolls, goblins, and rune servants of Senetvia, and all of these other figures. And it's just this battle of these demonic creatures of chaos fighting against the undead, and obviously you fight against the undead and gradually they get risen up again, and so it was a battle that, despite the numbers, despite the forces, it was never particularly going to go the Kunrok's way. So eventually they do end up losing, but they do buy enough time for not so much the forces of Schaa to prepare their defences, because they do prepare defences including a mass barrier around the outer area of Calastenir, but it gives time for the forces of Destinal to actually muster and pass on and head and aid both Schaa and the Twin Isles. It's also notable that within the Twin Isles, there were a few, like, Galacaross the forces and legions of Senetvia nearly overwhelmed everything. Palaket and Alaranu were pretty much the 2 exceptions. But and also, just for clarification, whilst I was mentioning the trolls again, Lezerir, that was the name of the one who's currently in charge. And right, anyway, back onto it. So Nagrasek's Demesne, though, is still continuing, is still mustering up forces and everything and just trying to return to his power, but it's notable that Tonnreaf fled, and it's not really known where he fled, although during a battle between, sort of in this area here, between the pyramid and Daralothir, there are two dwarven guards who are found dead by the pyramid of the deceased. And onto the dwarves. They don't really get hit too hard by the events that have previously happened. Like they've been locked into on and off skirmishes against the Demesne and Steotha, but the main thing about them is that their king Jelkorn doesn't make it out of the raid on Galacaross, so now Lazan is also king, although he works in quite close comparison with his cousin Zeodan, who currently operates out of the ruins of Daralothir, trying to repair it and build it up as much as possible. And the Ijati, moving on to them and their current situation. Currently the Ijati are probably in the strongest position of anyone on Schaa. Which is ironic considering they're the only ones split between two different areas, with a lot of focus on Erejan, and obviously with everything that is going to happen on Arasin, a lot of their attention is probably going to get focused in the steppes again. But they have their own focus, and Tivos is still in charge, he's still holding on, and it is relatively well focused. They're still keeping an eye on a close watch over the Dark Elves, but for the most part they're doing relatively calmly. And now we move on to Destinal. The situation in Destinal is curious. This map is about our date, so I will explain. Currently, Tonnreaf's domain is not a thing at this point in lore. Currently is being guarded by a mixture of the Wood Elves and Darenthal. But the current situation for the lands of Destinal is that Cathaltir, and this being pretty much the last, Cathaltir and Revlaror are pretty much the final victims of what Galacaross did, because Revlaror's king, gotta remember which one it is, I believe it's Sankor. Yep, Sankor. He gets injured in a naval battle off of the coast of Idros, and the wound is poisonous. So early on into the Shadow Piece he does pass, leaving the land of Revlaror in a bit of turmoil, where some older slights are going to start resurfacing and causing problems. Currently held by Velian, Sankor's now widow, and Cathaltir as well with Kalern. Now, the Kingdom of Cathaltir, you had the... Wait, is it Kalern? No, I believe he gets ill, doesn't he? Yeah, he does, because it's not Kalern, it's Kaleth. King Kaleth actually dies in the final battle of Baralath. He helps the goblins keep the gate open and ends up dying alongside them. And which leaves Cathaltir now in the charge of King Kalern. But Kalern, despite being notable for his actions within Galacaross, is not going to be too long, because there's going to be a lot of fracturing that happens with Cafalter, which is going to be a significant part of what. So, Cafalter and Revloror are both on the precipice of having some rather chaotic notions occur. Tarasil and Talamarith. Tarasil, honestly, is the one in the safest position. The most updated factor is like more people are starting to drift north because now Cathimril has been constructed. So there's more venturing out there, and also with the threats coming from the south, like the raids, because there were raids from Galacaross and they were able to push quite far in. So it's just a bit worrisome for them. But Bauanoth is probably going to draw them into the Cafalter mess for a while. And Talamarith is still under King Laros, but he's aging now, and Tarasil's under Arion, with his eyes also being constantly drawn to the concerns of Tartak being potentially at risk again, and what goes on elsewhere. But to be honest, Talamarith and Tarasil are the two most secure human kingdoms at the moment, and to be honest, probably the two most secure human realms in all of Aphalas. The Temple Guard, they were holding Tartak for a while, but they have passed that back to Talamarith, and now they are resuming their duties. There's not too much necessarily to report, although the rumours of the Sparrowhelm returning are going to draw their eyes back to Arasin. The Wood Elves of Erelkarth and Aragan, still under Thoronsia. Yes, the name's a nod. But his own focus and eyes is more drawn now to Nasilabeth, worrying about what might be on the horizon after Senevia's return. And they're not too much to really report. They didn't exactly suffer that much in Galacaross either, but they and the Dracons did both get hit fairly hard by Tonnreaf's war, so there's always the risk and the issues there, as well as resuming the duties of the Protector races, so having their eyes on Schaa as well. And then you have the Dracons. The Dracons are in an interesting position. Obviously they have Darenthal and they have the Sister Realm Isles, with the Sister Realm Isles now being on a higher alert because of everything going on with Arasin and also Senevia's recent escape. But the Dark Kingdom itself, I have mentioned hinted at what may happen to Trelvin with a incident with a storm. So Darenthal may delve into a period of uncertainty as well, but at the same time, they did take worse hits than the Wood Elves in terms of naval forces, but all in all, their actual forces themselves got fairly untouched, so they've had quite a lengthy period of time to actually recover. So they are. So Destinor's got some areas of chaos brewing, but it's also got other areas of security. So it's like Tarasil, Talamarith, and the Wood Elves all have fairly good security, as do the Temple Guard. Cafalter and Revloror are on the precipice of chaos, and Darenthal is about to have something that could cause more issues for it as well. And we will move on to the Kirindrek. The Kirindrek are kind of resuming their duties. Their most significant aspect actually happens before Tonnreaf's war and all of that, when they bring up the barrier, the Agate barrier, or at some point during that time that occurs, because obviously it's at the end of the Shadow Dance. And they are resuming their duties. Cersei is currently operating in the southeast of the steppe with the Tribe of the Emerald Path. They have other groups and scouts operating, still focusing, and because of the impact of the Shadow Dance on early Valen, it's possible that the Kirindrek may look to try and retake it, to get their foothold back into the steppe, as well as having more eyes now drawn towards the Ice Elf territories and the north more than usual. Addressing onto the steppe, however, honestly nothing's really changed in the southern portion of the steppe. It's pretty much the same as it was. You've still got the same tribes operating in there, you've still got the trade from Garalane. Tonnreaf, again, unaffected. It's debatable that Vanillin, because of Nagrasak's Flame Tribe, might be caught up in some chaos or focus, but it's sort of unknown depending on what's really happened. Carbalez is probably now even more. Two things have either happened through the Shadow Dance. They've either become even more isolationist, or they've decided to broaden out a little bit because of the assassination attempt, and they probably didn't necessarily realise, unless someone found out, that it was actually a distraction to keep eyes drawn away from what the Ice Elves were up to. The early Valen bandits are most likely crippled. There are other operations and everything. We've got the politic picture again, so I'll bring that out in the edit. Narkerlin is where some of the most significant change happens, because that is now under the control of forces under the command of Londor, Elfkin, and Faraday, the human, as well as potentially Smoogorn's son, which is another topic. So Narkerlin is now a more active, secure watch post. It's currently unknown what's going on with the Gate of the North. It's obviously in a very significant spot, and I really need to add a ruin there to represent Kenanareth, and I constantly forget. But in terms of the Ice Elves, one of them has been kidnapped. There's been a couple of them slain, and the others are in hiding, essentially. And in terms of when I say in hiding, I have not actually decided where yet. So they are still present somewhere out there, with still loyal followers and everything, but their attempts at bringing basically what would have turned into destruction for Arisen were thankfully halted. And the Fayun, the Fayuk Mountain holdings, they are still present. There may be some internal divisions coming. There may not be. It depends. Honestly, what happens to them depends on how successful Rawne is and what he decides to do. Because again, Rawne is either hiding like somewhere here, maybe there, or all the way over here. So he is hidden somewhere with followers and forces operating in the ice and the tundra. And it's also notable that these demon creatures he tried to spawn in, these like what I termed as the closest thing in Aphalas to orcs, are now in the Ice Sea, most likely finding some of the old Fayun ruins of their original settlements when they first emerged, and are now taking them over. Or they might be elsewhere. It's unknown, because again, Arisen also is on the map down here as well. So there's a lot of, when you get to the northern half of Arisen, there is a whole lot of unknown going on. And You have the Arak Nihilith Archipelago. Natarg is still operating with his prison, although they are now under the task and the key focus of protecting the... Is it that they're protecting the... No, it's not that they're protecting the Amethyst. Is it? Hang on, I'm trying to... Yeah, they will be in charge of the Amethyst Crown because at some point it gets recovered from Rorne's original attempt and brought back to their guard. The Fayun descendants still operate off of Ancestonir, the Kirin Drekov of Mayajon, and the Sister Isle realms. And the Tourmalina Isles. The status of the pirates is that because of the number that the likes of Arios Seablade and Mayana the Sea Hunter do on them, the chances are is that a lot of them have descended into the Tourmaline pirates who drift around this area, like, which is why these isles are sort of named that way. But at the same time, they don't always land on them through the risk of what could happen if they linger too long. But I will just give a quick footnote. Currently, Lossakoth is fine. It had a little incursion through Galacaross, but nothing particular really happened because it's one of the most... It's in the centre of everything, and it is one of the most magically protected isles of the lot, so it's fine. And then we have the commotions of Honor Kivris. We'll start over here with the more areas. What's going on with the Half Ogres currently is not too well known. There's a lot of things I haven't yet explored with them. At some point I need to address what happens to Arios because he remains operating up here with the rest of his followers, but Mayana does get killed defending Steagris. Speaking of the Ogres of Hedotelic, though, it is completely unknown still what happened to Raunor or where he is. He's just out there somewhere. The demons of Nocerez still currently have no real follower or leader. Rorne was able to grab some of them, but that was a while back. So they do their odd raids that the Marixin Wardens and the other forces, like the forces of Onokrith and Arnavan, fight off, but it's not too much. And there needs to be some more writing focus on Okivris, and I will completely admit that. Because there are a lot of pockets as well, like the Alanay Savannah and all the wildlife that's in there, like the bygones and things. And just before I wrap up on this one, just a couple of other things I want to note. Obviously this map does not represent them, but you still have the subterranean forces under the Last Prince and the little rebel group as well. And that's ironically what happened to Trollvin, because he was going to investigate what happened as to why the Last Prince had been so silent, why there had been no sightings or whispers of him for years, but that's currently unknown because Trollvin never even made it. Or did he? Sorry, couldn't resist, but it is a good question because no one's really too sure what happened to him. But their forces are still operating in the cities. I do know at this point, though, that one of the Last Prince's children has been killed because they get killed by one of the Kunroks. Or not by the Kunrok directly, by the organisation of a raid onto one of their cities, but they are currently scattered, and I at some point I will try and do a subterranean map as to where they are. Partly I haven't actually fully decided myself yet, but... And the final thing that I want to note, because I've been mentioning a lot, is the locations of the weapons. The different weapons that Galeria created with the capability of being able to kill the creator beings, or dragons or wyverns or any of these like massively powerful creatures. So the current locations are, I will start with the Boa Calastenir. It's still in Calastenir. It's still under the possession of Tivos. It's fine. It's not been seized or captured or anything. The Staff of Schaa, as far as it's documented, the Staff of Schaa is still present within the Temple of Naros, safe and sound. The Amethyst Crown has been recovered and is now holding in Nagtarg's Bastion. The Spear of Arakan is currently under the possession of Theronsia, although that might be changing hands soon to another Wood Elf. And then you have the two axes, the axe of Adela and the Scarlet Axe. Now, both of these had been captured by by Sinetvia, but they were both. I know you can't see my camera, but I'm air quoting here, recovered, because the axe of Adela was recovered by the dwarves. The Scarlet Axe got stolen, so the trolls still do not have possession of it, and currently it is unknown who stole it. Well, aside from me, because I know, but... So, that's the situation of all the weapons, and I will also just address Galeria for the moment, because I've given a lot of mentions, but I don't really talk about her current whereabouts. Throughout Tonnreaf's war and the Years of Sorrow, she was floating about trying to coordinate everything. In Galacaross, she straight up fought Sinetvia. It was not a decisive fight. It ended inconclusively, but the destruction and the usage of her power throughout the strains of Galacaross and the destruction of the land itself have actually cost her so much of her power that she can no longer transform into her phoenix form. So now she can only go about as a humanoid, so travelling is... Obviously she has to go by boat now. She has no capability of flight because her power's been so heavily diminished. So a lot of the time now she's actually operating either our Lossakoth or the Temple of Galeria. She does make ventures and she does check over other areas from time to time, but for the most part she keeps to herself now. Is there anything else I need to mention? I could go across all the characters, but I think that takes a video of itself because there's so many going about now and there's so many different moving pieces. Like, you've still got the indigo foxes popping up here and there and everywhere. Got the remnants of whatever happens to groups like Morgana's group or the Nagtarg Scorpions or numerous other things. So yeah, that is where I'm going to conclude the current status of Aphalas in terms of the Shadow Beast lore, or going into it. And I hope you all enjoyed that, so please do comment, like and subscribe. Please do check out the links in the description. If you want to support the channel, please check out the Ko-fi page, which does also pop up on the Twitches. If you catch me live, it's scheduled to every hour, I think it pops up. But yeah, and as a final note, Path of Schaa is on its way. I'm going to hopefully have a fair bit of time tomorrow on it, so it should be coming close, and then the trilogy should be continuing. And once the trilogy is out, I'm still going to continue Aphalas lore, but I am going to start looking at some of the other works that are coming up, especially Teremity. So yeah, hope you all enjoyed that, and I apologise again for no face cam. I'm having some issues with OBS with that at the moment, but yeah, welcome to the Kingdom of Aphalas and the world of Fellowmind books.